nutrition for young athletes during the exam time. That's I mean, even the exams during college were more manageable than the Leaving Cert, but the Leaving Cert is on now. What can you remember? It's a little bit longer for me, but what can you remember about how you approached your lifestyle, general lifestyle around exams?
Well, I would have been a last minute studier. So I still did a lot of like studied a lot. So, but I don't remember ever like I still went to bed early, still had football all week, had training all week. But I do remember people in my class who didn't play sport or like didn't do any activity, and that was nearly encouraged to just really focus on exams and prioritize purely just studying during those weeks. But I think what we're encouraging now is to actually just be able to nearly plan your week, and it's what we're speaking with clients with, is to plan out your week and to include those study blocks, but the downtime, the still prioritizing getting to bed early, and where nutrition fits within that is to support all of that for you to have the energy to focus, to concentrate, but then to still go out and train effectively and recover properly so that you can get up the next day and be able to perform well in your exams.
Yeah, I think you made a really important point there about different people, different responses, people involved in sport, like athletes involved in sport. They could still very likely feel like that's their still their main priority rather than the exams. And I remember during my leaving cert period and around that time, it was a bit of a badge of honor to talk about not studying and all the other things that were going on to deflect from the exams. And I mean, that's just where I certainly was at that particular time point. There was a maturity element, but it still was all about sport and farming. And I was spreading slurry, and all I could think about was being off for the summer and not having to do exams again.
Mm.
And football. So there's probably a couple of parts to this in the sense that there are people who are all they're thinking about are their exams and the outcome of
Mhm.
those exams and the implications of those exams and the courses that they want to get is the only thing on their mind. And then there are athletes where some of them might even feel like these exams are in their way. And there's obviously these people in the middle.
Yeah. The clients that I'm working with now, I would say they different to me, and well, I still really did prioritize like study and cared about it, but they are definitely very diligent in how they approach their studying, and there are consequences, but they are have plans to go to university, and they're relying on their marks to support that, and it's for sports scholarships as well. So I think it's a good opportunity to nearly set yourself up well for being able to manage this period going into some downtime in the summertime, but also being able to see how you would manage this when you go into university. So I think there's lots of angles to it. And that's what we're kind of speaking with some of our clients, is how this see this as an opportunity as well to you manage this well. It says a lot about how you can set yourself up.
Before we had the podcast, it came on the podcast this morning, we talked about the different potential variables that influence our our energy, our concentration. And you actually mentioned there isn't a whole lot of research around nutrition in preparation or during exams.
No, there's not a lot when it comes to actual exams. The research that we spoke about this morning related more to cognitive function, so focus and concentration. And some of the research within that is related to concentration and focus in sports. Um, but when it comes to, I suppose, sitting down and absorbing information, like memory, it would be it hasn't been studied so much in maybe younger athletes in exams, but there is plenty of research to support the elements that will be used and needed to be able to sit down, focus, study, retain information. But a lot of it comes back to less so on specific nutrients, more so on actually meeting energy needs and including those nutrients within that. because the biggest gap when it comes to lack of concentration, lack of focus, is energy balance, whether that's related to sleep or lack of nutrition. So it's really trying to manage that in this stage.
To bring a little bit more context and maybe a little bit more science to it, we've discussed this before, but there's research on how your RMR, your resting metabolic rate, or your need for calories increases during periods of extreme focus and concentration. Now, I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but it was significant. Even while sitting, if you're concentrating, your brain is using a lot of extra calories. Do you remember offhand?
No, but we did have this argument when it came to the chess players. I think there was a piece of research, but that wasn't actually that as accurate as we would have spoke about back then. But when we were with the motorsport, it was a huge topic of where it was all about focus and concentration, and a lot of the energy demands that we would have relayed would have been based on how much energy they were using to make decisions. Um, in addition to obviously the physical demands in that sport was under recognized.
So just for
Um,
those parents or young athletes that might be listening, it's just understanding that the brain uses significantly more calories in the form of from glucose
mm,
when you're going through these periods. So it's not like just because you are sitting for prolonged periods, you're not exercising intensely, that your energy needs drop significantly. So being conscious of that and being aware of that variable is really important in how you plan and structure. And we talked about the variables or barriers. There's the physical potential demands on the body, and then there's the stress component, which can impact appetite and digestion, and there's the actual practical side where people are up in their rooms or they're studying in libraries and their focus is on what they're learning and not the structures that are needed in order to maintain that energy and facilitate the 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 knowledge retention and information retention and concentration and decision making, like you said.
yeah, and even the nutrients like the brain using glucose are really focusing on carbohydrates, like particularly whole grain carbohydrates to support attention, work and memory, and reducing like mental fatigue,
Mm.
which can easily build up if you're just sitting, especially if you're sitting and not getting that fresh air, not getting regular breaks. But also if you're skipping out on meals or not prioritizing that. Um, and it was protein was mentioned as well. So like protein is very often just pushed towards supporting muscle repair, but it's also produces neurotransmitters that supports focus and attention and cognitive function. So it's really looking at if we can create those balanced meals, regular meals, not skipping out on anything. The importance of veg and plenty of color to provide those additional nutrients like zinc, magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, the vitamins B12, B6, and B12. Like when we look at our recipes, that's what they're all rich in those nutrients, and it's so easy if we can have those regular meals that includes a balance of those nutrients that we can achieve those nutrient needs and the nutrition box is taken care of. Then it's just about blocking off the other things that supports energy as well, like the sleep and rest, downtime, breaks, nature, fresh air.
Yeah, so maybe we'll break it down into different components here. So you mentioned sleep. I think it's really important that I mean this is not something I would have fully appreciated when I was a young athlete myself, and that is sleep deprivation will impact your ability to recall information, your ability to maintain your energy, your focus, your decision making, and exam periods are usually not just 1 or 2 days. They're over a prolonged period. So, there could be exams that are more challenging, or there could be exams that you really need. Like all exams are important, but you can almost think about the early exams getting a lot more attention. But if your energy begins to fall off or you become more compromised in your concentration focus, you're not getting enough sleep throughout that exam period,
Mm.
and that's going to have an impact in what you're looking to do and how you want to perform. So it's recognizing there's you kind of have to have your non-negotiables in place in how you approach your sleep over that period. And, also, I wish I understood a little bit more about learning when I was younger, and
Mm.
that this whole thing about locking yourself away in the room and, oh, I was studying for 12 or 16 hours. No, you weren't. It
Yeah.
was not actually possible. So
Mm.
be more strategic and smart and be honest about it, because you do need breaks. You need to break up your study periods. You need to hydrate. You need to have regular meals. You do need to sleep. And being strategic about it and having a study plan that is relevant to you, being honest with yourself, not just what your friends are doing or what your classmates or others are doing, knowing I can concentrate for 30 minutes on this particular subject, and this is how I do it, and it's through writing, it's through note taking. There's a process there that can be really valuable to how you make the most of that period, and that's before you even consider, like we talked about, the protein components or the key nutrients. There's a an almost like a high performance strategy that you want to put in place and how you're approaching this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like an endurance event, exams over that period of time. That's one thing I wish if I could go back, that is the way of learning and like actually having not just time blocks. I think I would have done that, but focus on like what do I actually want as an outcome from this time block to learn, because it is when you relate to back to sport and like what and time and attention and productivity, it is all the same thing, and like having that focus at a young age would be so valuable.
I know this is harder during exams earlier in your academic life or education, but just as you said about the outcome, what has been so fascinating for me doing my assignments for my master's in sports psychology is doing assignments that I feel solve a real world problem, that feel like they are highly relevant to my own personal development or area of interest. And if I was to relate that back to the Leaving Cert or college exams, I think about the subject matter, and I think about how can I make this, how can I form this as a memory? How can I create a level of value around this topic? And I'll never forget, this was one of the best, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but just I'll never forget it as an exam moment. I did physics as part of my degree, and I was awful when it came to maths, and I thought physics was going to be the thing that really showed up my limitations. Like I really thought that this was something that there's no Daniel Davy, physics, you must be kidding. Like there's no way I could be anyway good at physics. But there was a moment in I had a brilliant physics lecturer who had a huge personality in college in UCD, and he wanted to demonstrate horsepower. And in order to do that, he wanted to get a volunteer to run up the steps of the lecture theatre. And the idea was he knew exactly how many steps there were, how what the period was, what the elevation was, and then it was about my weight and time to show how much horsepower I could produce. So it's an equation. So he asked someone to do it, and I did it. And of course, the competitive me, like the whole lecture theatre is full. How quickly can he do it? And I mean, I went up like that. My life depended on it. I was in the stairs Olympics. So he broke that down on front of the whole class to show that I could produce this amount of horsepower, and I was absolutely awesome. I was so invested in it that I remembered the formula.
Mm.
Like it it so clearly just imprinted in my brain. Now I don't remember the actual, I might go back and look at it now, but I remembered what the formula looked like and what the output was in the production of horsepower. And it was a whole exam question. And
Mm.
the lecturer came down. through the lecture theatre because that's what they do. And he looked at me and gave me the wink. I got 57% in my physics exam, and it was like I had got 97%. But I remembered it, and I think there's two parts of it. There's like, how do you remember? How do you study? But if I didn't have that experience, and if I didn't relate, if that equation, that formula wasn't broken down in that way where I could feel like that was relevant to me, I don't know if I would have been able to recall it as well. So what I'm saying is that you got to find those ways of relating what that content matter means to you.
Mm. So the difference in like I'm just remembering information and actually like understanding it in a personal way.
If we were to think about just, you mentioned planning for the athletes that you're working with, what do you think are the most important things for them to consider? Because we've talked about the brain, we've talked about the increased need for energy, decision making, we've talked about sleep. What do you think, from a practical perspective, somebody needs to do these things, and how they're approaching their lifestyle and nutrition? What's the recommendations?
So some of the discussions that we had were they're off school, so not actually having the structure that they're used to requires them to nearly develop their own structure. So it's sitting down and actually planning out their day, that it's not just going through the motions and whenever the time comes up they'll decide to go and do their training or decide to go. It's actually just dedicating a bit of time at the start of the week or the end of the week to know when they're maybe switching off from study, knowing when those study blocks are. And then for this client in particular, she was slotting her meals in just at slightly different times, as she didn't have to kind of prepare her lunch the day before as she usually would and bring it to school. It was now there's a bit of time for cooking, and she was actually excited by having time in the evening to cook as well, whereas before it would have been quite kind of rushed heading off to training. So it was just really looking at the time available and ensuring that in the same way that this person in particular was planning for her school week, that she was still dedicating that time while there was no that structure had changed, and that was helping her to bring to light what some of the important elements that she wanted to break through in her week were.
I'm just going to point to a couple of really simple things. I think having a batch of protein bars or protein balls,
Mm.
flapjacks made, having a couple of extra protein puddings or put the yogurts like pouches in the fridge. I think having a water bottle that you bring with you, having even knowing in your own head what sandwiches that you want to make for your lunchbox or leftover dinner that can work well, whether that's simply pasta dishes with veg or salmon. Obviously, salmon. We're not saying having omega-3 during these exams is going to make a big difference to your brain function, but having healthy fats in there will certainly support health and function. And I think also we talked about how important it can be to sometimes move towards easier to consume calorie options, whether that's smoothies or juices. Um, Not relying so much on sugar, but not being afraid either that if that's what's available to you, a banana bar and Nature Valley bar and a half-liter of milk, there's nothing wrong with that as a way of keeping on top of your energy. And one other thing that you could do is just, have I always think about James Moran's reference to the cyclists in the Tour de France. And even though they knew their nutrition targets inside out per hour, what that looked like, they still had their targets right in front of them on the bike, taped down. And I think even having a sheet beside you or writing that out for the typical day, what your meal plan might look like for the week or for the day, and reminders of when you're hydrating, when you're eating, what you
Mm.
have, be very simple way of staying on top of it.
Yeah, because it's a time where it's much easier to probably not think about it as you're sitting down and studying. It's easy for that time to pass by if you don't really have that plan in front of you. But some of those foods also are, when you mentioned omega 3, like I like to sometimes use that as helpful ways to like include it in the week,
Mm.
I would have always associated with recovery. The same as like getting some, if you're having overnight oats and really basic, easy to put together meals, but it's including the nuts and the seeds and the berries and the oats. They're all contributing to the energy and the ability to concentrate and focus in different ways.
Before we sign off on this one, Gemma, the reality is that there are people out there that are going to be using different forms of caffeine, so it's probably worth just touching on it. What do you think people should be considering if they're using caffeine drinks or coffee?
You can use it as an opportunity to support better focus, to support mental, like reduction of mental fatigue, but to not use it thinking that it's giving you energy. You'll get that from your rest and your recovery and your sleep and the meals that you're going to be getting throughout the day, and not definitely not to be relying on it to keep you up late at night and studying a bit extra. That it's or the use of energy drinks, being really conscious that it can have its plenty of downsides in that as well, especially if we're over consuming in those. But having one or two cups of coffee earlier in the day, not letting it affect your sleep later on at night, and using that strategically to maybe get yourself more so in a good position to nearly associating it with work and effort.
And what about the different forms of caffeine? And I guess what I'm talking about is I don't know what the habits are like of young people, but I suppose one thing before you answer that question I think people should consider is if you're not a caffeine consumer and how that can make you feel if you've been consumed a lot of caffeine, plus there's the stress or potentially a little bit of nervousness or maybe there's a bit of anxiety pre-exams.
Mm.
That can really feed into it and affect how you're feeling. So just being conscious that if you're not familiar with caffeine, there's the physiological responses and the potential downsides. But there's Red Bull, there's Monster, there's loads of other things. Like it's easy to think that these are going to be the thing that makes the difference.
Yeah, I think a lot of people associate them just with I'm going to get more energy, I'm going to get more done. But yeah, the downsides of it, especially if you're not used to it, is the jitters. Especially if you're also really anxious at this period, that it's probably not going to be helpful. It's going to potentially increase that anxiety and the jitters and not feeling good, and even gut issues that can come from that as well, and impact appetite too. So it's just understanding yourself and not going too far off what you're used to doing, and not trying to introduce the same way in a sports set, not trying to do anything too new or different here to what you would normally do.
When this goes out, which will be going out quite soon, don't be afraid to comment or ask any questions and let us know what you think or if there's other things that you think we could add to the conversation. Let us know.